I'm Edie Lush, and I'm here in the Hub Culture Pavilion in Davos. Delighted to be joined by Professor Joe Nye. Thanks for coming back.
Well, it's nice to be here again.
Tell me what's on your mind regarding China. There's been a lot of discussion recently, and especially here in Davos.
Well, there's a concern that China and Japan might, by miscalculation, get into some sort of scrap over the what the Chinese call the Diaoyu Islands, the Japanese call Senkakus. They're basically 5 barren islands. But it's clearly an issue which could be dangerous. The Chinese basically send ships and planes into what the Japanese call their air and sea space every day. And sooner or later there's going to be an accident, and the question is how it's going to be handled. And we've got to make sure we handle it in a way that doesn't escalate.
What do you think are the dangers? What are the ways that you could see this happening?
Well, in 2010, there was a Japanese Coast Guard ship that was hit by a Chinese fishing trawler twice, not once. And you might say that that was, clever strategy by Beijing. In fact, the Chinese captain was drunk.
Right.
But when it got to Beijing, first the Japanese arrested the captain. The Chinese said that means you're asserting sovereignty. Eventually, it escalated to the point where the Chinese cut off rare earth exports to Japan, which is a serious
a really
business.
serious business.
And so the thing escalated. And one of the great dangers is that one of these accidents happened like that, and in a world of nationalism, in both China and Japan, that it gets out of control where the top leaders really intended.
The two economies between China and Japan are so interlinked, though, that you would think that they'd realize this and try to move away from it, but that doesn't seem to be happening.
Well, you'd hope so, and it actually does help. I mean, after this episode in 2012, where the Chinese objected to the Japanese purchase, the government's purchase of 3 of the 5 islands, there were demonstrations against Japan and breaking of some diplomatic contacts. Trade went down about 20%. Well, when trade drops about 20% between the second and third largest economies in the world, that is serious. Fortunately, it's recovered, mostly recovered, and investment is still staying relatively high. But if you get something that's worse than that, shipping or the fishing boat hitting the Japanese ship, it's conceivable it could escalate and actually do real damage to the economy. Not to mention the fact that the United States has a security treaty with Japan, and we've said that these islands are covered by Article 5 of the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty, so we will be drawn in.
From the American perspective, what do you think, what is America's position, or how do you see America versus China and Japan? How does that triangle work?
Our ideal is to keep a triangle with good relations in all 3 legs, because our interest is in stability and economic growth, and we don't want to see a conflict between China and Japan. In fact, in October 2012, Hillary Clinton asked me and 3 other former officials to go call on the prime ministers of Japan and China and to explain that the Americans wanted to cool this off, that our interest was to have good relations in all 3 legs of the triangle. Top leaders that we talked to agreed. They said, we don't want to let this get out of control. On the other hand, given the example I gave about the trawler hitting the Coast Guard ship, sometimes things happen. In 1914 there was an assassination in Sarajevo. Nobody expected that to lead to 4 years of war that ended Europe's centrality in the world balance of power, but it did.
How different do you think we are now to 1914?
Well, I just wrote this column in Project Syndicate saying that it is different. Today, leaders have, in effect, a crystal ball. In 1914, if you'd shown the Tsar, the Emperor of Austria-Hungary, and the German Kaiser a picture of 1918, they would have seen they'd lost their thrones and their empires were dismembered. And nuclear weapons give leaders today a crystal ball. I mean, you know that whatever comes out of a war that escalates nuclear, it ain't worth it. So that's a significant difference. The other is, I think the Chinese and the Americans and the Japanese are aware there's no complacency. 1914, people thought there'd be a short, sharp war. They talked about being home by Christmas. Of course, it wasn't. I don't think you have any of that kind of illusion in Washington, Beijing, or Tokyo.
Thank you so much for stopping
Well,
by the
it's
Hub
nice
Culture
to see you
Pavilion.
again.
Nice to see you again.
Good.
I'm Edie Lush.